Nina glared at me from underneath her sweatband, arms crossed across her chest in her long lycra leggings. Nina was a gym instructor and a seriously obsessed health hippie. She chomped on chia seeds and chased down superfoods from seaweed to salmon. She juiced, she ran, she gymmed, and was so skinny you could have faxed her. She looked at me as if I was a feeble-minded moron and repeated what she'd just said, only a little louder than before. Of course butter is bad for you. It's a saturated fat. I checked it out on Google. She didn't exactly say, "You stupid idiot," but she may as well have. And well, to be frank, if you put the two of us next to each other, Nina with her sweatband and her long legs and skinniness, and me with my gardening clothes and my short dumpiness, she would have looked much more like Ideal Health does than what I do. But it wasn't either of our faults that we were disagreeing about this. Who's to know? One day butter's good and the next day butter's bad. It seems like health advice is an ever-moving and ever-changing target. I was still thinking about this as I left gym to drive home and plugged in my latest audiobook by Brené Brown and listened to her describing the characteristics of people who she calls the wholehearted. And as I was listening, I thought, gosh, dang, she could be describing my grandfather. My paternal grandfather had moved in with us when I was about 6, after Granny died. He was the person that I associated with fireside stories. A large belly laugh, which always surprised me coming from his small body because he was a rather quiet man, normally. He was also the person I associated with Cari, that magical seaside shack he'd built with my dad and his brother when they were just boys. The place we always went to because we were too poor to have fancy holidays. The place where we would slippy slide down that clay hill and play who can see the lighthouse first, which told us we were getting closer. It was the place where I learnt about composting toilets, rainwater storage, and paraffin lamps. But most importantly, I realized much later, it was also the place where I fell in love with the sound of a joyous community working side by side as families help families build their rondavels, those round mud huts with thatched roofs, which the locals at Cari built. Babies were strapped on mothers' backs, children played unfettered, and you could hear the joyous ringing of voices across the valley as they worked side by side. But Gramps had something else that was special. If he'd lived another 3 years, his life would have spanned 3 different centuries. He lived to the ripe old age of 101 with fabulous health, and he was as sharp as a button. And one day when he was in his late 90s, I said to him, "Gramps, what's your secret?" Well, typical of Grandpa, he wrote me a list. And when I looked at the list, I said, "But Grandpa, there's nothing special on this list." And that's when I saw a little twinkle start in his eye. And he said, "There is a secret, but I can't tell anyone." I'm like, "Gramps, you can tell me, can't you?" He whispered, "I avoid doctors and hospitals." Grandpa didn't stress or worry about his health. He never went for checkups. He certainly didn't take a handful of medication. And yet he was hale and hearty until the night he went to bed and just left his body peacefully in his sleep. And when I realized all those things, listening to Brené Brown in that car, I had an aha moment because I'd witnessed Grandpa's life. The answer to the questions about health lay with people that were already living healthy lives to over 100 across cultures and creeds, and all I had to do was to study their lives. This was an aha moment that would completely change my life. It set about a passionate study, interviewing centenarians, reading everything I could about them, reading everything I could about aging studies, digging deep into psychological and medical journals. And what I found truly surprised me, because their health looks nothing like what Nina or the Western world would have us believe makes us healthy. Because in a nutshell, centenarians simply aren't obsessive health fanatics. The irony is that most of them are a pretty relaxed bunch about their health. In fact, most of them don't even try to be healthy. Jeanne Calment, the French woman who lived to 122, was known to eat up to 2.2 pounds of chocolate a day. And Emma Morano, who lived to 116, when they interviewed her doctor, he looked a little puzzled and said, "She ate a lot of candy." And then almost as an afterthought, he said, "But she ate it with childlike joy." Ha! Now that was something that I remembered about Gramps. Just watching him eat his porridge in the morning was to watch delight. He'd take his porridge, put it in his soup bowl with its flat sides, take the back of his spoon and spoon it up onto the sides to let it cool. Then he would take a blob of butter, a big swirl of fresh cream. He'd grate some cheese all over it, and then sprinkle it liberally with brown sugar. Then he'd scoop it all back in again, give it a gentle stir, sniff his plate, and then dig his spoon in and put it in his mouth, close his eyes, and you could just see joy and delight overtake him. But as you can tell, by Nina's standards, if saturated fats were a health ogre, he was a dietitian's nightmare. As I've studied centenarians, I've come to 3 important conclusions. Here's the first one. Don't be overly stressed and worried about your health. Certainly do not be obsessively health fanatical. It reminds me of the fabulous book by Dr. Lissa Rankin, who opens it with a provocative question when she says, "What if I were to tell you that the least important thing to do for your health is to look after your body?" You may think, wow. But she made that statement having had her practice in a very poor area where nobody did anything right for their health, and then moving to a very affluent area where everybody did everything right for their health and yet had just as many health problems. The other thing that I discovered in studying centenarians was that they have about 65 ways of being in common, the ways that they negotiate life, and that their health and longevity have less to do with their human doings than their human beingness. It has to do with their consciousness. And thirdly, they take delight in the small and simple things of life. They don't need a lot of stuff to make them happy. In fact, most centenarians grew up pretty poor. And when I stopped to really ask myself what it was that brought me huge levels of contentment, it wasn't driving an expensive car or living in an upscale address. It was the small and simple things like plucking potatoes and vegetables from my garden, like playing cards with friends, turning what some people might think of as trash into treasures, helping people to discover what I know about centenarians so they can relax more about their health, and teaching people that with these 2 hands and the earth below their feet, and with recycled stuff that would otherwise land in the landfill, just like those beautiful indigenous people who lived in Msikaba, they can build just about anything for pennies on the dollar, For example, a pizza oven for $36 instead of almost $5,000, which a company quoted me. A small garden cottage for $463. These are the simple things that bring me joy. And I've learned from centenarians that the simple things that bring you joy are also what bring you health. Nina still does all the things centenarians don't. She still gyms like crazy, chases down superfoods, worries about every morsel that goes into her mouth, and is a slave to her Fitbit and her scale. But thanks to Gramps and those centenarians, I've been released from doing all those things because I used to do them too. I tell you, the day that I took my scale and all my diet books and burned them, I felt 1,000 pounds lighter. Now, I eat with joy instead of guilt and worry. I've ditched calorie counting, I've ditched my gym, I've ditched my Fitbit, and instead I play pickleball and potter in my garden and do yoga because I love them. I do what I love and just live a vibrant life. I've even ditched my doctor and I've never felt better. Seriously, would you rather live my kind of life, following the Centenarian code? Or would you like Nina's life, following the Google code?